We're at Cedars Park in Cheshunt, Hertfordshire, and this was the site of a royal palace in the early 17th century. And they used flint to make follies or archways. There's a big flint arch further over. But this one, if you look at the flints, which are between 40 to 70 million years old, and if you look at them, you can see shapes of creatures inside. This one is part of a tetrapoda creature. Used to have the eyes on the head because they were seabed feeders. Today crocodiles have the eyes looking full because they hunt from the surface. Here's a prawn or shrimp. You can see its little legs and its antenna. It's quite amazing that these have survived considering they're soft-blooded creatures. If you look further down, bumps like this you see in Flint, that was a creature. So you can almost see the head, there's one eye there, and the body down here, but you can't really tell unless you get to an expert. Here's another sea creature. There's its mouth and its chin, and you can see with little legs. So this was some sort of creature that crawled on the seabed. There's its nose, its mouth, and there's its eye. And that could be a jelly, like a jellyfish. It could those two little holes could even have been its eyes. Here's another tetrapoda. See its head and nose, and there's its tail wrapping around. If you look here, you can see the snout of a tetrapoda and its head. Further up, you can see another creature. It looks flattish. That could be like a jellyfish. Further up, you can see all shapes of similar heads, and the hollow part of the bottom, that could be another one inside its head. And if you come across here, all these hollows you see here, that's where a creature was, but it's actually the chemicals that formed inside the flint they've gone, but that would have been its head. Here you can almost see an eye and its nose, so that could be another tetrapoda folded up. There's possibly another jelly, like a jellyfish. There could be little eyes and its antennae. This is an interesting one. A different chemical composition that's gone in from the air. It could be from a volcano, but it's a browny colour. They're all little creatures, but almost like plates, like an armour of plates. If you look at these little black bits, it's like armour on the back of a creature. But you need an expert to work out what the creature was. There's another creature there, a jellyfish, like a jelly. Another little jelly there. When you think we came from all these little sort of jelly-type creatures in the sea, and it's what whales eat today. I'm just trying to think of its name. Plankton. It's like early plankton. We come from these human beings. Another one up there. If you look, you can see almost its eye. You can see it's been flattened by the pressure of stuff coming on top. If we go to the other side before we go to the main flint folly, sometimes in the shadow from the sun you can see that's where a shell's been. You can see that's an impression of a shell, like a shellfish. More little creatures. Another little prawn by the look of it, prawn type creature. They were called different things then, of course. This is a fossil, and that hasn't fallen out of the hole like the other side, so that's part of a body. That looks like a jelly again, but it's got a tail. So that could be like an early fish or something. Yeah, there are hundreds. If you look, you see jellies and plankton. But there's no mention anywhere that all this flint has got fossils in it. All these extra white bits, they were other creatures with a bit flattened. That could be a head of something. That could be an eye. That could be its little mouth. That could be its fin. Could be a little early fish. See the tail? But books you can get don't show these soft creatures. They don't show them. All these hollows, there's a creature been inside there. You can see a fish. Look, see a fish. Its tail, its eye, little fish. Because you get several fossils, several creatures on top of each other when they died on the seabed. A lot of these could have died 66 million years ago, when the asteroid hit the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico, and they reckon for thousands of years there was a cloud of dust around the Earth, and all the vegetation died because there was no sunlight, and then plant eaters died, and the carnivores that ate them died because there was no food. But they now think it's not only the asteroid that hit the Earth, it was also all the volcanoes that went off. Some of them were huge, like Yellowstone Park and other parks called calderas, several volcanoes in one spot. And you can imagine all the rubbish that was thrown in the atmosphere. So it could have been thousands of years. Little creatures survived, like mice, small creatures, and it's from those small ones that survived in the sea and on the land that we come from, that we evolved. But it's now, I reckon it's 66 million years ago, and not 65 million years the asteroid hit. And we have plenty of asteroids coming to the Earth, but fortunately Jupiter's so powerful magnetically, they're drawn into Jupiter. And some years ago we actually saw a meteor break up and strike Jupiter. There's a famous film, and there's about 6 strikes on Jupiter itself, and they could have come to the Earth. And there's another one called Meteor Crater in Arizona, and they reckon that was only about a ton in weight, but the huge crater, it was from here to the cafe in Cedars Park, the huge hole hollowed out. And they're finding more. They found another one, I think, near China, which they never knew about before, but undersea exploration, there's a huge crater in the seabed, and they reckon that was another one. So if a lot of those were happening, the same as volcanoes were going off, and they could have been set off by the shock of the asteroids hitting the Earth. And you can imagine the complete turmoil on the planet. Anything on the surface, perhaps hundreds of miles from where they struck, they were just fried because of the heat. And then with the clouds and the dust and everything else, nothing survived except the little creatures. And if they didn't survive, we wouldn't be here. But before the Yucatan meteor strike, there were other periods, 256 million years ago, 560 million years ago, where all the creatures then living were wiped out at the same instant. So we're now going across to the main Flint Arch. These were ice houses. I'm convinced they were ice houses. They used to put ice from the winter in here to keep meat and stuff preserved. That was early refrigerators. And if you see actually on this, you've got the same thing again. You've got fossils all over the place. This is what's called tufta. It's what's thrown out from a volcano. If it lands on water, it floats. And that's a huge one. So these are all thrown out, probably further north, where the mountains are. And when the glacier came down here during the last ice age, these were dragged down. Then when the glacier went back, they were dropped. So anything found either in this area or elsewhere, they brought to sites to build things. But this is a mixture of brick. So this was much later than Theobald's Palace. Sort of whatever's available, they built it with it. You know, slabs like paving slabs and bricks and that. And they've got some huge bits of flint, so they must have bought these from the coast, perhaps even from Kent, because they're all in the cliffs there. They're too far away, but you see any colorations, there one there where the hollow is, that's a big creature. You can almost see the shape of the creature, heaven knows what it was. Got long legs, it could have been an octopus. You just can't tell, unless you've got an expert here who's got a proper book. This is a good one. Can you see the head of a tetrapoda? That's the head of that's its body. This is another creature. It could be like a little octopus or a nautilus. That's its shell, that's its little legs where it blows out the air, like we have nautiluses today. Another little creature, look, you can see its little legs and its head. That could be a shrimp type creature. See a shrimp? You can see where the legs were. So that could be a shrimp. They didn't call them that then, of course. There's a fish. Obviously it's a fish. See the wide sides and its tail? So obviously a fish. So you've actually got thousands of creatures embedded in the flint. Another creature. You can almost see its shape. And that could be its mouth. You know, that's a head of something. But that's all fossil, it's not flint. And that's one that's fallen out, obviously. Although we're sitting in Cedars Park in Cheshunt in Hertfordshire, the site of a royal palace of James I, Theobald's Palace, I'm going to mention a little bit after talking about the Flint, in the Flint Arch and the Folly entrances, about my 10 years experience of looking for fossils in Scandinavia. Now, over the 10 years, from books and from some apps and also local knowledge, I've learnt how to look for signs of fossils on the beaches there. The East Baltic Sea is very shallow, and although they have storms in the winter, there are sometimes high winds that move the pebbles and the small stones and even big rocks on the beach. And if periodically you go to the same site, you can see new fossils just by looking at certain angles with the sun behind you or in front, and you can see different colours on the rocks, and by looking at them you can make out the first signs of tetrapoda creatures. Quite clear sometimes, and they used to have the eyes on top of the head because they were seabed feeders. Carnivores, but nowadays, of course, crocodiles have the eyes looking straight forward because they hunt on the surface of water. Then you can see shrimps, and you can see crabs sometimes. I showed my grandson recently a rock, and you can see the two eyes of the crab and its back actually on the rock, as if it's been made by hand, but you can see it's a crab. They were called different things then, and the crocodiles had different names then, but all crocodiles today come from that. On one spot, on one of the ramps near jetty where they put boats in, there's a huge rock, and you can clearly see the mouth of a megalith. It was a ginormous shark, and the descendants today of that shark, which was 80 million years ago, is the great white. And they're the ones featured in such notorious films in a way as Jaws. But you can even see little creatures like prawns and jellyfish and that, and you would think such soft-bodied creatures would not survive even an impression on rocks or in flint. But at the time there must have been a lot of layers of dust falling down through the water to where they died or covered them. And then with the various chemical reactions of salt and other chemicals in the sea at that time, they sort of filled in where the body was. So although you can see the shape of tetrapoda creatures, or jellyfish or prawn or fish, it's an impression of their shape. The actual body's gone, of course, but the chemicals in the sea at that time allowed preservation of these hollows. The only things we find physically are dinosaur bones in some of the badlands in the States and elsewhere in the world, and even mammoth whole bodies in the tundra in Russia, because it's in permafrost. And they've even found a baby one recently, still with its hair. They've even found fossils in some places in the world still with the coloured feathers on it. And they think the feathers were to attract mates or something like this. And of course the only dinosaur survivors today are birds, because they came from a flying dinosaur. So it's quite fascinating. So in the 10 years I've been studying it, although I don't know all the names, I can't remember the names even when I found out, it's just fascinating to think that especially the little creatures that look white like plankton, we humans evolved from those creatures, because the small creatures were wiped out in 66 million years in the Yucatan asteroid strike, and others plus volcanic. Only the small creatures survived, and we're actually descendants of those small creatures. So that's what I'm going to say today about my experience of fossils.